The Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza was the first big success in the compact SUV space, becoming the best-selling SUV in India for 5 straight years. But competition in this segment is intense and newer rivals have edged out the Maruti slightly. So to remedy that, Maruti Suzuki has come up with this, a comprehensive reworking of the Brezza. To start with, Maruti Suzuki has dropped the Vitara nameplate with this change. So it's just the Maruti Suzuki Brezza now. And following on from the Baleno, this is more than just a facelift, with only the Suzuki Global C platform being carried over. The Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza has been completely redone on the outside, and it's a much more contemporary looking car. In fact, it's one of the more nuanced designs that we've seen from Maruti lately. And you can see this with this much more imposing front grille. You have this grey patch of plastic which is quite nicely done, these ridges here, and in the way this panel sort of merges into this much more intricate LED light cluster with these ridges again and these LED light signatures. And that same aggressiveness is also reflected in the lower part of the bumper. We have this huge bull bar effect kind of grille here, and it's got this huge opening, these skid plates, and quite a nice intricate housing for the fog lamps, which are LED by the way. It might not look like it, but the Brezza has also been completely redone from the side, and it's a great job because you can see that there's again quite a bit of sophistication to the styling. You have this nice clamshell bonnet, these quite intricate, sharp looking alloy wheels, and moving along you have these new cuts which are very subtle but very nicely done along here, and the way this line sort of comes from there with a big haunch, comes from there and just merges here. And of course you have that requisite roof rail because it is a compact SUV. And coming along, another nice touch is this full glass panel. It's one complete panel, merges from here to here, and the quarter glass itself has been made bigger than earlier. But the best angle on the new Brezza is probably the rear. So you have this wide LED with the diffused lighting, which is quite reminiscent of a Toyota, which isn't a surprise. And you have this wide Brezza lettering, and the boot lid itself is sort of caved in like this, which makes the car look much more taut, compact, but in a good way. And the intricacies that we saw in the bumper from the front, it's been carried over here too with these ridges here and the silver sort of buff skid plate. To begin with, you enter the Brezza with a much more reassuring thud now thanks to the better sheet metal that's been used in this update. And immediately you notice that this interior is a sea change from earlier. That earlier almost stark look to the dash is completely gone, and you have a much more contemporary looking space here with this very nice sort of layered finish to the dash. The textures and materials are contrasted, they have good feel to them, and as you can see with this sort of brown here with these ridges, it feels good, it feels nice to touch. It's hard plastic but it's not tacky in any way. And similarly the center console with this big new 9-inch touchscreen, you have these lower placed AC vents, again very much the norm now, and these new controls which have been carried over from the Baleno, but they're as usual quite well done. Another change, this new steering wheel with paddle shifters, that's for the new 6-speed automatic. This instrument cluster has also been redone. It's got really nice legible dials. And to go with that, again the head-up display from the Baleno is brought here too. And you also get 360-degree cameras. Now another significant change which isn't immediately apparent are these seats. Like the ones at the back, they've been redone. They're much more supportive. The earlier flat seat back, which made the Brezza quite a pain to drive over longer distances, that should not be the case anymore. And there's a huge list of features. For example, you get the 6-speaker Alchemist sound audio, you have ambient lighting here now, you have these fabric inserts, you have a cool glove box, you have wireless charging, and for the center console it's better done, it's got better spaces here to keep stuff, a sliding armrest, another useful feature to have, and of course the biggest talking point, this is the first Maruti to have a sunroof, which again makes the cabin airier. It was always an airy cabin, but makes that just that bit airier. The Maruti Suzuki Brezza is now more expensive, on par with its Korean rivals. The features list has been enhanced to match this, but we would have liked to have seen auto wipers, a third rear headrest and ventilated seats. You do get auto headlamps, connected tech, telescopic steering and cruise control, so there is good value to be derived from the Brezza. But it's not all good, there are some drawbacks. Some of the finishing could have been better. These panels look like they're gaps, but they're not, but they look like it. And you have these sort of scratchy bits here. And considering how well equipped the Brezza is and the big increase in price, we would have liked to have seen ventilated seats at least. Now since the Brezza continues to be based on the same architecture, so it's got the same 2500 mm wheelbase, the space here at the back hasn't changed, but there have been improvements. The biggest one of which is this new seat. The cushioning to it is much more firm, it's better contoured, which means that over a longer distance you might be more comfortable here. Of course, there's not too much under-thigh support as is the case with most of these compact SUVs, but it's fairly usable. And again, there is space here for a small third passenger, but you have this sort of hump here which will make it uncomfortable for them. Another nice touch is this new USB A and C port. It's got both, which is a good idea, and this holder here, which is again a useful touch. Now another thoughtful touch is this holder for the seat belt, which means that it doesn't go behind, it's a big hassle to get it out. So it's nicely parked here, which is a good thing. And of course you also get ISOFIX seats, so safety has gone up too. Boot space remains unchanged at 328 litres, and you continue to get the fully folding and removable bench, always a handy addition. Now this 9-inch touchscreen is the same as on the Baleno, and like in that car, it's functional. You control pretty much everything on the car through it. It's got logical menus, it's not very difficult to get used to, and a nice display too. You do only get wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which is a bit of a miss considering you get a wireless charger now. But in the Brezza, somehow the placement of it feels like it's a bit too close to me. It's not a functional flaw in the sense that it doesn't affect the way you use it and so on. It doesn't affect your vision out either. It just feels like it's a touch too close, and it's also quite prone to catching sunlight or reflections. But you have this clear display with these menus here, which are now different, and this head-up display. So it's overall quite a easy car to drive, but just with this touchscreen it feels a bit too close to me. Now for the way the new Brezza drives, of course there is a difference. It's got a new engine, a new 6-speed automatic, and the Dualjet engine, it's still a 1.5 litre, it's only an improvement over the earlier one. The K15C motor comes equipped with Dualjet tech, which improves the overall drivability, claims Maruti Suzuki. Although power figures have dropped marginally by 2 PS and 1 Nm to 103 PS and 137 Nm. Having said that, these differences aren't too apparent. And the biggest change with this is the better fuel efficiency. The Brezza now returns almost 20 km per litre, which is quite impressive considering the segment it operates in. And the motor itself, it's like how it is in any other iteration of Maruti cars. Now the motor itself, it's quite brisk off the line, especially with the 3 PS of electrical assistance you get with the smart hybrid thing. So it's great as a city car, which is also helped by the fact that you can find a seating position quite easily. The steering is tilt and telescopic adjustable, which is a great plus. You can raise your seat height, you can see the edges of the bonnet, a great help in the city. And it's got that brisk, low-end performance, which all Maruti cars have. This one does too, which makes it very usable in the city. Only when you start pushing it a bit harder do you realize that the mid-range performance, which its rivals, the turbo petrol ones, have, it doesn't quite have that. But having said that, it's a perfectly usable car even on the highway. As you can see, I'm doing highway speeds pretty comfortably. And the big part with that is this new gearbox. It's helped drivability tremendously with the 2 extra ratios. The older one was quite an old kind of labored kind of gearbox which would drone along on the highway. It doesn't do that anymore. Of course, you can still hear the engine, but that's more to do with the engine rather than the gearbox. And it's a big improvement in the driving quality of the Brezza. As for the gearbox, in the way it works, you get these paddle shifters. They aren't the quickest to respond. The gearbox itself isn't the quickest 6-speed automatic we've driven so far, but it does the job well. I mean, it will give you the downshifts when you want it. It's obviously quite focused towards efficiency, which means it will quickly go to the highest gear possible by 80 kilometers an hour. It's already in 6th gear. So when you hit the throttle for an overtake and so on, it takes that split second more than what we like to give you that downshift. But otherwise, as a regular commuter, it's perfectly usable, the gearbox. Another positive is that when you do take manual control, it'll rev right to the red line, which is a good thing, and it'll hold it there, which means that overtakes and so on become quite easy. Now the paddle shifters, they really do work, and as you can see now, when I'm just holding a steady speed, the engine's also not droning. It's a quiet, calm car on the highway. Now the biggest improvement that has come aside from the gearbox is the ride quality. The Brezza, the earlier one, was not the best over bad roads. It would, hop around, feel a bit skittish and crash over the smaller bumps. This one doesn't do that. It feels much more substantial on the move. It'll iron out those rough low speed bumps well. Of course, it's not completely flat over these bumps at low speeds. There is some amount of firmness that you still feel, but it's much better damp, so you don't feel it too much in the cab. It's not too much of a disturbance. And then when you're on the highway, you realize that it's much steadier. It feels much more planted at higher speeds, at highway speeds. It gives you that added bit of confidence which was missing in the earlier car. So overall, the Brezza now feels a much nicer car to drive. Now you've got a quick drive in the manual Brezza, and as you'd expect, it's got that same 5-speed manual. It's got those crisp, quite well-defined shifts, so it's quite easy to use. The clutch, again, it functions in quite a progressive manner. There's a well-defined bite point, so you don't need to rev the engine out too much. Although we would have liked it to have been a bit less weighty, a bit less springy. It's quite different from the Ertiga that we very recently drove, which had a very nice light clutch. This is a bit different, it's a bit weighty. And now unshackled from that 6-speed automatic, the engine also feels just that slight bit more energetic. Of course, you have that quite flat mid-range, but it just feels a touch peppier. And this is definitely the one to buy if you like driving. Now there's nothing to choose in terms of fuel efficiency between this and the automatic, which is a commendable job. So that isn't a factor in deciding which one you want to buy. But what is different is that this lacks a 6th gear. So say for example you're at 80, 90 like I am right now. You notice the engine is running a bit more stressed, which takes a bit away from the experience. But again, this is a minor issue which isn't a deal breaker at all. Now the bits about the driving experience that we don't like with the Brezza, it's that the higher speed refinement could have been a bit better, considering that the Brezza is now one of the more expensive cars in the segment. There could have been slightly less tire and wind noise. And this steering, it doesn't quite recenter. It's a common issue that we face with many Marutis, and that hasn't been rectified. It was on the Baleno, hasn't quite been done here, which sort of means that you have to be a bit more cautious while taking U-turns and such. But other than that, that's a small hiccup. But other than that, the Brezza is now a much nicer car, much more comfortable car to drive. Safety has been another area of improvement with the 2022 Maruti Suzuki Brezza. There is more safety equipment with stability control now standard. Aside from the reinforced structure, there are bigger brakes, although the slightly inconsistent feel from the regen system continues. You also get 6 airbags in the higher spec cars, and Maruti Suzuki seems to be aiming for a 5-star crash rating for the Brezza, considering the earlier car was a 4-star rated one to begin with. So does the Brezza have what it takes to get back to the top spot in the compact SUV segment? I mean, with 50,000 bookings already, it seems like it will. And it should really, because the improvements that Maruti Suzuki has made are thoughtful. It's addressed the flaws that were there with the earlier car. It's corrected them largely, and then wrapped it in a package which is genuinely quite attractive, both in terms of the way it looks and in terms here on the inside, where you have this vast list of features. It's a more comfortable car. So overall, it's another strong product from Maruti Suzuki.